Okay, let's begin. So in this room, we are joined by the Honorable Ellen Pratt of the Commission of Land Use and Management of the Liberian Land Authority. She will be speaking on government and the Liberian people working towards an inclusive Liberia. And then we will have some time for questions and answers. I will be sharing your presentation, and then you can take it away. Thank you. I'm sorry, we can't hear you because I think you're on mute.
I was. Good day, everyone. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are. Thank you for the introduction, Alyssa. And on behalf of the Chairman and Board of Commissioners of the Land Authority, I'm pleased to participate in the 10-year facility learning exchange and share some stories from Liberia on how we as a government have worked with the Liberian people and our partners towards support of our customary land formalization. We can go to the next slide. I will briefly walk you through our customary land governance timeline. So in 2016 is when we began customary land formalization. And it started as a series of pilots based on the passage of the land rights or the development of the land rights policy, which was developed in 2014. And this land rights policy was a very pivotal policy because it, for the first time, is advocating for the rights of customary communities in Liberia. And I'll explain more about that. In 2017, in response to the challenges of land governance, including the recommendations of the land policy, a new agency was established by law, the Liberia Land Authority. And this was an agency that was developed to respond to the challenges within the land sector. I am one of the first commissioners. There are 5 commissioners that govern the management of this agency. And we were envisioned as a one-stop shop for land administrations with broad policy mandates. In 2018, the land rights law was passed. This was a pivotal piece of legislation directly from the land rights policy, which for the first time in our nation's history is protecting customary land rights and actually supporting tenure security. How was that done? Previous to the passage of the law, Liberia had 2 categories of land ownership: public land and private land. Private land was all lands that were deeded, less than 20% of the country. Public land was the 80% of land that we all know is customary land, previously held by the state, with customary residents granted only user rights to the land on which they lived. This law has now allowed the development of 4 categories of tenure: private land, still land deeded; government land, which is land that specifically has government infrastructure; public land; and customary land. This customary land now represents the 80% of lands where indigenous people have lived and worked for generations. So in the wake of this law, the question is, how do you now help customary communities to protect these rights that have been given to them in the law? Customary self-identification guide, community self-identification guide was implemented. We started to develop the steps to go from having a community that says we are a customary community and we want to formalize our land. What are the steps to do that? In 2021, we developed a guide which outlined 6 steps. And now going into 2022, we are finalizing some of the specific guidelines to help this process to be better streamlined and to actually start to produce customary land deeds for residents. Next slide, please. So this is a snapshot of Liberia. We have 15 counties. And since for the last 6 years, as we began the process, we've worked in 11 of these 15 counties and 156 communities. While this is a good start, this tells us that we have more work to do, because if 80% of our country is under customary land ownership, this entire map should be blue. We should have interventions in every county. Next slide, please. And there are reasons why we have not reached into every county that we're in. So the next slide actually shows, illustrates the steps. And as you will see, the first three steps, which are self-identification, self-governance, development of governance structures, and boundary harmonization, is where most communities have either begun the process or it's ongoing. Confirm, and to date, only 3 communities have actually gone through the process of the issuance of a deed out of the 156. So the question you then ask is, what are the approaches? If you go to the next slide, please. So the question we ask is, what approaches can help achieve agreement between government and indigenous communities, or in our case, customary communities, on rights? And what is the experience? So we've looked at about 5 approaches for brevity. The first one will be political will. As a government and an institution, if you do not have the political will, next slide, please, to actually advance land rights, you won't see the type of achievements that you need to see. The next slide gives some detailed examples. Here is the picture of our president signing the land rights law after 4 years of advocacy at national government. Next slide, please. With the establishment of an agency to address this problem shows political will. Excuse me. The passage of the land rights law shows that the government was propelled to address the challenges. Excuse me. And then you have the strategic partners with the national government and donors. My apologies. And then you have these multi-stakeholder platforms on land reform, because we realized that we could not address the issues in a vacuum as a national government. And last but not least, it's a gender integration strategy, which now mainstreams gender across the land reform sector. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Alyssa?
Yes, I've gone on. I think you can see the whole slide. I'm sorry you're sacrificing your voice to share with us.
I'm sorry.
No, don't worry about it. You've been talking a lot.
I know this back-to-back is tough. So our second approach is open dialogue. We realized that it was important to take government to the people of Liberia. In Liberia, we meet under the Palava Hut to address issues, concerns, community disagreements. So creating an enabling environment for the dialogue on issues and interests was very important. A classic example was a roundtable that was organized by the Land Authority and CSOs to address the concerns when we perceived 2 laws to be in conflict: the new land rights law and the community rights law of 2009. Bringing key stakeholders to the table, we quickly understood that the laws were not in conflict, but there were certain tenets that needed to be harmonized. And then you start to work towards harmonizing those tenets of the law. We also realized that we need to strengthen decentralization at the local and regional level, because you cannot address customary land issues from a central point in a central city. Through this, we've established county land boards, which are comprised of private citizens, CSOs, businesses, professionals who act as a liaison with the land authority and the people in each of the counties and communities. The next slide, please. Another approach is adopting an inclusive and collaborative dialogue and approach. All are welcome. This is particularly important in the Liberia context because of the level of patriarchy. Women were not at the table, and we realized that including customary communities in the development of policies, legal and regulatory instruments lays a solid foundation for future collaboration, particularly during implementation. This was evidenced by the level of collaboration we had in the development of the land rights policy, but also in the passage of the land rights law. As I said, this law was passed in 2018, but introduced to the legislature in 2014. And it took a concerted effort and a coalition of private sector, CSOs, donor partners, and government advocates working together to advance that law to lead to the passage 4 years after it was introduced to the legislature. Next slide, please. And then, sorry. Thank you. This next slide is peer-to-peer learning. This land rights and customary land formalization was new to the government of Liberia. It was new to the people of Liberia. So it was important to test methodologies through pilot projects that allowed us to identify, discuss the shortcomings, and build upon lessons learned. Examples would specifically be the first step in the process is community self-identification. It was developed jointly with civil society and the LLA working with the support. I will say thank you to the tenure facility. This led to the further development of a national guide, which outlined the 6 steps. Initially, there were 10. Lessons from the ground, lessons learned, experience shared, that was reduced to 6 steps, streamlining the process. Also, we saw evidence of the land use pilots jointly developing a national guide for land use planning and management as we were testing these new methodologies with our partners. So for us, peer-to-peer learning is one of the key approaches. Next slide, please. Yes, so for the sake of brevity, I think those 5 key approaches have helped the land authority to get to the point where we are. We still have a lot of work to do, but the will is there. And I think as we learn more lessons, work more collaboratively, we will start to see an increase in the number of communities that have tenure security, which for us is key to the peace and stability of Liberia. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Honorable Ellen Pratt, for that very interesting and rich presentation. And now the floor is open to questions, which you may put in the chat, you may raise your hand, you may just unmute and speak out. Questions or comments or sharing of experiences. This is the moment. Please, Kath.
Yeah, thanks for that really interesting presentation. I would be really interested in your views as to if we have partners in other countries, but where the political will is a little lacking, but maybe there are, you know, there is an existing law, it's quite good, the procedures are quite clear. What would be your advice for engaging with the government to sort of promote greater political will to implement the existing laws? Thanks.
For the question. So we've had that scenario several times where we've actually had, we've invited other governments to visit Liberia, and through knowledge sharing, study tours, you want to sometimes take our officials away from where they are to a country where it is working. They can then go back to their constituents with examples and real life experiences. That's one of the things that we've seen as very key, is take your government to where the solution has been working, where customary land formalization has worked, where the law has been implemented, and it's peer-to-peer learning.
Great, thanks very much.
Great, thank you. Anyone else want to build on the discussion? Please feel free. Nonette, did you want to speak? Please.
Yes, I think we have someone here participating from the current program being developed in Papua, and they were very impressed with your presentation, Ellen, and are thinking perhaps they can create parallels of this kind of, in a way that's learning and informing their government, very much related to cats, but this one they can sort of tandem and parallel and perhaps visit eventually. But that would be, yeah, that would be what was coming up. They're expressing that to me, and this is very much a value, because governments are harder to invite on board. And so if they're also speaking to governments, the government counterparts, that makes it much more of a sort of direct exchange of lessons and ideas. Yeah, and land use and laws are all the same. They're very much the same in Papua right now. Yeah, in Indonesia, the part of the Melanesia part. So that's a yes, Ellen.
Thank you, Nonette.
Ellen, you're receiving a lot of congratulations in the chat.
Yes. Thank you, everyone. I'm reading the chats. Thank you all. I'm deeply honored and appreciative of the opportunity to always share and learn. So thank you very much.
It is a great opportunity for that. So, Augusta, I don't know if you've turned on your video because you'd like to speak, or just for the pleasure of seeing each other. Either is fine.
No, I guess I would have a question. I mean, Liberia is quite amazing in this relationship that you've built between the government's reform process and land recognition process and the communities. And I was just curious how much neighboring countries around you have learned about the experience. Is it something that they realize how much you've done? Because it's quite an accomplishment and it's quite developed. And I'm just curious who else knows about it.
Thank you for the question. So, you know, we stand on the heels of other countries in Africa that have advanced rights. A lot of our laws were built from the Tanzanian experience, where we've seen how Tanzania has actually developed and grown primarily with just recognizing customary rights. Ghana has a strong recognition of customary land rights, and their stool lands and custodians of stool lands are central to the development of that country. So we've seen Uganda with emerging land rights, Mozambique. So it's across the continent. We stand on the shoulders of other countries that have advanced this legislation. I'm honored that our particular law is one of the strongest, but it is a culmination of learning from other countries that started the process, other countries that had challenges. It's been a learning experience. So I will say that we've seen a lot of momentum across the continent for customary land rights. We don't stand alone. There's a question in the chat about challenges in the process. There were so many challenges in the process. I mean, one of the key challenges was awareness. You have a very strong law that the country does not know about, that customary citizens whose lives have the potential to be transformed from this law don't know about this law. And how do you then get this information across the length and breadth of the country. That was a challenge. How do you have consistent messaging? So where the LLA could not get to everyone, particularly because of human and financial resources, you worked with partners. But we saw a challenge in not having the same message going across. So we had some very different approaches across the country, many of them not working, leading to additional land conflicts. We had to come back to the table, streamline our messaging, be consistent across the board. Finances is always an issue. In the previous, I shared that you see the numbers drop in participation when you get to confirmatory survey. With the budget realities of Liberia, there's limited operational funding to the land authority. You need operational funds to conduct surveys around the country. Additionally, with our survey and population of surveyors, 94% were retired a few years ago. We have a human resource gap in the number of physical surveyors that can do this work. In the absence of a land administration system, we still need to do hardline surveys around the country. In the absence of guidelines that look at best practices and technology, how do you then do this survey? So there are many challenges, and the challenges continue to emerge. The key is, how do you address them? And how do you adapt your approaches to still get to this end goal of customary land formalization?
Thank you, Ellen. I have a question in the spirit of what we're doing now. You said you were inspired by countries like Tanzania, and I was wondering how that learning happened. Was it in an exchange? Was it just by following by example? How was learning transferred in that instance?
So it's been a long, continuous process. I will speak about the time that I've been at the land authority. So the land rights policy was built strongly on the Tanzania model. I'm not sure if there were visits or exchanges, but I know there was definitely sharing of knowledge. But fast forward to now, we actually, through the support of the Swedish Land Authority, have a technical assistance cooperative relationship with Tanzania. That has led to several knowledge exchange visits back and forth to Tanzania. They've come here and we've gone there. So further now, as we develop some of these guidelines after the policy and after the law. So specifically for land use planning, we have a technical cooperative agreement.
This is great, very interesting to hear.
Thank you.
We have around 3 minutes left in this session, and it's a moment really to ask the questions and to make any comments, even maybe something that Ellen could learn from someone else's experience. So anything that this discussion may have reminded other participants or that could be useful. We'll be posting everything online, by the way, Ellen's presentation, her email address.
Let me put another email in the chat. I'll do that now.
Great.
There we go. Yes.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Oh, we have a question from Maximiliano. I'll read it just for the recording. He asks, how does Tanzania and Liberia compare? How do they compare on the status of land rights?
So thank you for the question. I will say that a lot of similarities, but a key difference is that in Tanzania, all land is vested in the state, and communities are leaseholders of their land, which is different in Liberia. People own land in Liberia, communities own land, hence the customary land formalization process. So I think a lot of what we've learned is how to govern and manage this land without, in the absence of the tenure security component, the land management component is where many of our similarities lie. But the actual ownership are two very different scenarios.
Thank you.
Yeah, I've got maybe a final question if there's time.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
One quick one.
Yeah, do you find there's conflict between, say, potentially external investors or the need for development for infrastructure, mining, that type of thing, and the sort of registration of community lands? How does the government sort of manage that?
Oh, sorry, we're leaving. To answer the question, no, the government owns mineral resources subsurface, but we have found that that's been one of our major challenges, is the issue of concessions and large scale land acquisitions, many of them done in the absence of the customary communities. So this is one of the reasons why the land authority was enacted, because we realized a huge portion of our lands, anywhere from 35 to as high as 75% of the estimates of Liberia's customary land, is under concession agreements in the absence of meaningful participation of customary residents. That has led to land conflicts, that has led to lack of development of these areas that are within your agreement because people reside in those areas. So with the past